Pig butchering scams. If you've never heard of them, you should. It's now the biggest crime ring in the world, bigger than the global drug trade, and it could be coming for you. Hear about it from two people who've been on the inside and find out what you can do to protect yourself here on The Great Untold.
And after he'd spent all of his own money, he then started taking money from his local church, and when he'd done that, then he came for the bank's money. You fatten up the pig, you cut it, you juice it, you use every bit of it. Finally, at the end, when you're taking the last large amount from the victim, you butcher the pig. And so when it all came crashing down, so did the bank. The bank collapsed because of the CEO falling for the scam.
Pig butchering is a reference to fattening up your target before you take absolutely everything they have. It's very disturbing. And Scam Inc. is a brilliant new podcast by The Economist. In-depth, haunting, troubling. It made me want to get a stiff drink after. Sam Colbert is one of its producers. Thanks for joining us, Sam.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
So what is the origin of the term pig butchering?
Pig butchering, the origin is Chinese, actually, because the perpetrators of these scams largely are Chinese origin gangs operating in Southeast Asia. In Mandarin, there's a whole nomenclature for the various pieces of this scam. You fatten up the pig, you cut it, you juice it, you use every bit of it. And then finally, at the end, when you're taking the last large amount from the victim, you butcher the pig.
I'd heard of Nigerian email scams. It's not even that on steroids. Can you kind of describe for people, because for a lot of people, this will be completely new.
Yeah, so somebody will reach out to you, and it could be on whatever platform you spend time on. So it might be, I get these all the time now, I get messages on WhatsApp, and they might appear to be a wrong number. It'll say, "Hey, Dave, see you this evening." And you go, "Oh, I'm not Dave. This is a wrong number." And they go, "Oh, so sorry, but how are you? You know, what's your name?" They find some way in, or they might match with you on LinkedIn, on a dating site, on Facebook, and from your profile they will find something to talk about, and they will just chat. They will just befriend you, and sometimes this can go on for days and weeks before any whiff of a scam begins. How it then begins is they show flashes, whether it's photos or through just subtle mentions of a wealthy lifestyle that they have, and say, I made some money through investing, and specifically through cryptocurrency investing. Often there's a wealthy uncle involved, someone who showed them the ropes and is helping them do this. And at some point they come around to, if you'd like, I can show this to you too. And because by that point they've befriended you, or often is the case, they've started a romantic relationship with you online, you are inclined to trust them. And they will even say, if we do this together, we can start to build our life together by growing our money. And so it's a really clever scam in that, if it was just a romance scam, if it was somebody online saying, we're in love and I need you to send me money, that'd be one thing. And if it was just an investment scam, that'd also be one thing. But it's the combination of, they create this intimacy and then they scam you through what appears to be some third party. You're not giving them money. You're investing your own money on this platform that looks legitimate.
I was explaining my 11-year-old daughter about this. She was like, well, can't they just get on the phone with them and talk to them or get them on Facebook? But they have AI that does deepfakes. So it could literally be a woman from Vietnam writing out the message. It's being translated. It's being turned into an attractive Australian brunette. And as a deepfake on screen, that's really convincing.
We spoke to someone who she was working for one of these scam operations, and she had male colleagues who would be the guys at the keyboards. So they were chatting with male victims online, and they were pretending to be these attractive-looking women. And if the guy says, I want a phone call, I want a video call, they try to put them off. They have a whole bank of photos and videos they can send. But if they really want to talk to someone, this woman would get on the phone for her male colleagues. And so she had to put on an accent and, as you say, deep fake herself, basically. She had an AI filter on her phone that meant she could take the appearance of the woman in the photos that her male colleagues had been sending. And what we heard from people is, once a victim got a video call like that, once they were able in their mind to verify this person on the other end, then they were in. Whatever doubts they had went away, and they just went with it. Yeah, it's absolutely mad.
Yeah, it's a bit fucked up. I mean, you can't trust anything. My understanding is they've got a division, they've got an arm that does the money laundering, they've got an arm that does the recruitment, they've got an arm that does this. So this is an extraordinary transnational network. It's not 100 people working in an industrial complex somewhere in Myanmar or somewhere else. Where do they get the technology? Because it's world class.
You've got people who specialize in recruitment. You've got people who specialize then in transportation and getting people who work in these platforms, across borders and to these places. And then even within an office, you might have a team of people who are trying to make that first contact. So that there's a team that will reach out to you online over LinkedIn or whatever. When they've kind of got a bite, they will then pass that over to another team.
You'll make money at the beginning, won't you? Like, that's the fattening part, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes they'll even let you withdraw money. So you put money into this site, which looks legitimate, but it's not. It's a bogus website. And you'll appear to see your money growing and growing. And then you'll say, can I take some money out? And they'll say, sure. And they'll let you have some of your money back. And then they've bought your trust. And so then you put more and more in. And then when it comes time for you to withdraw all this money you've made, the excuses start coming. You've got to pay a tax. So you need to verify your identity. And you will chase that money, bad money with good money, to try to get your principal out. Because oftentimes people have spent everything they have on this thing or even have borrowed money from banks or relatives and are desperate to get their principal back. And so when it all came crashing down, so did the bank. The bank collapsed because of the CEO falling for the scam.
Karina asked that I only use her first name. She's in her 40s and lives in California. She has a PhD in chemistry, a postdoc in neuroscience, and works in the biotech industry. In her spare time, she does triathlons. She was single and looking. Her friend suggested Bumble, the dating app.
And, within a week, I had met somebody that I thought was pretty fantastic.
Evan was 43, 6 feet tall, in good shape, with sandy blonde hair and blue eyes. He was Dutch, living in California and working in finance. They chatted for a few days on Bumble. Then they exchanged numbers and moved to WhatsApp. That was Evan's idea.
And once we moved to that app, communication became much more frequent. It went from, just a few minutes a day in the Bumble app to almost hours a day in the first few days. I think initially I just liked how much attention he was paying to me.
Karina lost $152,000 to her scammer. She's on a 10-year plan to pay back all the money she borrowed.
We, in the first episode of the podcast, talk about a guy called Shane Haynes, who was the CEO of a little bank in a town called Elkhart, Kansas. And we went down to Elkhart and talked to people there. He got caught up in one of these scams on LinkedIn. And after he'd spent all of his own money, he then started taking money from his local church, where he was a part-time pastor. And when he'd done that, then he came for the bank's money. He ended up spending $47 million of money the bank didn't even have. That was more capital than the bank had, and blowing it on this scam. And so when it all came crashing down, so did the bank. The bank collapsed because of the CEO falling for the scam.
From the people that you met and sort of the things that you saw, do any of them stick out as having really just moved you?
There's a really heartbreaking bit where this guy who was a friend of his and was a fellow part-time pastor at the church describes that moment where the bank collapses and the church accounts are down at the bank. So he goes down just to check the accounts, and most of the accounts were federally insured, and for most people who had accounts at the bank, it was okay. But he goes down to the bank to check all is well with the accounts of the church. And that's when he goes through the statements and sees, oh, he's been stealing from the church. I found those characters really moving because I guess, I could relate to people like that, who there was so much hurt in this community in Kansas, that their friend had done this to them. And it's complicated feelings, right? Because their friend had done this to them, but he himself had been a victim. No one was more a victim of this scam than the bank CEO himself, who lost all of his own money and is now in prison. But people were so hurt and upset.
There's so much there to talk about, and this part of it is psychology, because we're not talking about a financially naive person. We're talking about somebody who makes a good living, who's financially educated, who runs a bank, and yet they fell for the scam. That's not even the really disturbing part. It's the level of sophistication which really got to me. This is a global operation. They use artificial intelligence. They use state-of-the-art technology. You don't have to be dumb or naive or simple-minded to be fooled by this.
The people who are falling for these scams, they don't have your typical scam victim profile. You kind of think of someone who's older, who maybe is a bit naive to the internet, who maybe can't really discern, what is legitimate and what is not. The people who are falling for this are people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who are educated, who have money, because that's the people that these scammers are targeting. And the methods are very sophisticated. It's a whole team of people working on you. It appears as one person, but it's a team of people, and they're drawing from scripts. They're working in an office together, and we'll come to the office. But with data breaches and kind of this network of this market of stolen data online, they can collect data on you and learn about you and learn what kind of scam or what kind of platform you might be vulnerable to, right? So you can get, kind of in the same way that you get like targeted ads online, based on your search history, you might get targeted scams based on, what they know about you, that will make them harder and harder to differentiate from what's real, and harder to resist. They know your vulnerabilities, whether it's loneliness or looking for an investment opportunity or whatever it is. This guy Shane, there's this CEO of the bank. I mean, everyone we spoke to in the town he's from said this was a very clever, very admired guy in the town. He'd been running this bank for 12 years successfully. And they said, if you imagine the kind of person who you would expect would never fall for something like this, it's him. I mean, he had customers coming to him themselves being scammed, and he was the guy to try to coach them out of it. He encountered this stuff all the time. The most incredible part of the story was, it was July 2023 that the bank collapsed, and it was all over. He'd lost the $47 million. But we spoke to the FBI agent who investigated the case, who said he talked to Shane a few months later, that October, and said Shane was still under the impression that this person he had met online, who he thought was a woman called Bella living in Australia, he was under the impression that she was somehow going to make this all well, He was still under the spell of this person, to the point where later that year, he flew out to Australia to go meet this person, who was, I presume he never got to meet her. And I guess by that point, then he accepted that this had happened to him.
You had a bit about Ilona Katz, a woman in New York.
Ilona, she was amazing. Yeah, so she had been tracing cryptocurrency, getting in touch with cryptocurrency exchanges, and then trying to get money back for people from the exchanges. Yeah, she had a story about going into an old folks' home and going through people's phones and seeing just how inundated these people were being with messages online from potential scammers. And so she was going through kind of one by one and deleting messages off people's phone and thinking about their relatives, like, I hope you thank me for like clearing your grandpa's phone of all these scammer messages. And I think that was really striking to her, is just how big the problem was, because people are just so under assault.
They also target college graduates, they target the elderly, they target all sorts of people who are lovelorn, and that's a growing business. Like, they're getting better at refining those, aren't they?
One of the common questions we got is, how do I talk to my kids about this kind of thing? Because young people are used to living their lives online, right? Like, it's not unusual for people of a certain age to strike up a conversation with some stranger on the internet, and build trust that way. Whereas maybe if you're a little older, that seems, how do you fall in love with someone on the internet? Well, I think, for younger people who were online dating and all that kind of stuff, it's not so unusual. There's torture rooms, and then you sort of walk down a hall, and there's the karaoke room, the karaoke parlor, and often there are women there who are sex workers or are forced into that work as rewards for people.
So why The Great Untold, you're asking yourself? Why this podcast? Well, let me tell you. So I've worked in television and in film as a writer and show creator for 15, almost 20 years now, for some of the biggest networks in the world, for FX and Fox and AMC. And for every great true story that gets made, for every Erin Brockovich, for every Schindler's List, for every Spotlight, another 1,000 never see the light of day. It's just that tough. And truthfully, these days, it's more brutal than ever. And frankly, it breaks my heart. Ergo, The Great Untold, a chance to share some of these stories from the storytellers themselves. So thank you for joining us. If you like what you see, please press like, press subscribe. And now let's get on with the show. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting, because so far we've only talked about one group of victims that pig butchering targets, and that is the people losing their life savings, their mortgages, their pensions, everything that they have. But what makes this scam so different is that it has a second set of victims, the people doing the scamming. Because believe it or not, many of those people are victims too. Regular people who've been kidnapped, trafficked, and are being forced to work in heavily guarded compounds, surrounded by barbed wire, at gunpoint, often for years at a time. Now, according to experts, there are now close to 1 million people being held captive in scam factories around the world, nearly 400,000 in Myanmar alone. These are small cities, some of them. 1 million people. Sam, that is a staggering number.
There's one in particular who we feature in the series, is a woman we call Rita, who was a Filipina mother who saw a job posting online on Facebook. And often those job postings will be, it'll be like, it'll look like a call center, or it'll be something in IT. And so she responded and was given plane tickets and told the job is in Bangkok in Thailand. So we're going to fly you out. When she got there was a driver waiting for her. Someone, has her name on a plaque, and they say, hop in the car. And then they start driving. And we spoke to a few people who went on this exact same journey. I mean, it's a pipeline, and they think they're going into Bangkok, which should be a half-hour drive. And they're in the car for hours. All of a sudden, they're in the middle of nowhere, still in this car, and the driver doesn't speak their language, and they can't communicate. And they go, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to hop out and end up in some field out in the middle of nowhere? Where am I going to go? What ends up happening is, in the case of the Thailand pipeline, they get driven to the border with Myanmar. They get told, get in this boat. They get ferried across the river. On the other side, there's guys standing there with guns. They get in another car. They end up at this walled compound. And the compound, as you say, it's like a company town. Like, there's places to live. There's restaurants and shops. There's entertainment. You never have to leave.
There's torture chambers.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're made to sit there and scam online 7 days a week, sometimes 12, 14, 16 hours a day. If they don't do a good job, or if they reveal to the customer what's going on, then they are tortured and sometimes killed.
These were not uneducated villagers. They were computer scientists. They were mathematicians with high-level degrees who'd been brought in to help develop the technology, the AI.
Yeah, they want people with language capabilities. They want people with tech capabilities. We spoke at one point to a guy who had been an accountant inside, and the more skilled you are, the less likely it is that they're going to let you go because you're valuable to them. Yeah, absolutely.
What's probably the freakiest, the most shocking thing that you came across?
I think when you think of these compounds, the contrast is really odd. I mean, there's torture rooms, and then you sort of walk down a hall, and there's the karaoke room, the karaoke parlor, where if you're a kind of middle manager, at one of these scam operations. Or if you're a well-performing scammer, your reward is you can go drink and do drugs and party with the bosses. Often there are women there who are sex workers and perhaps have been forced into that work, who are there as rewards for people. I mean, it's sort of a torture den and pleasure palace, debauched pleasure palace all in one. It's so odd. It's so odd. One big driver of this is shame. They don't know they're being scammed, but they know they're doing something weird online that's difficult to explain to their friends and relatives.
What's your best advice if you're looking for a job and you see somebody, with a great job opportunity and business class tickets out to Bangkok or Dubai?
One big driver of this is shame. People who've been scammed or are worried they're in the process of being scammed don't really want to talk about it, or if they, often it's like they don't know they're being scammed, but they know they're doing something weird online that's difficult to explain to their friends and relatives. So I guess the advice is kind of just to encourage people in your life to be vulnerable. I mean, if you sense that someone maybe is succumbing to this kind of thing, don't come at them from a scolding place or an angry place, because that's going to encourage them to close further in and rely more heavily on this friend they think they've made online. So I guess just be very open and forgiving as you can with the people in your life, so that they feel like they have people they can turn to other than, so-and-so they met on LinkedIn.
Stay tuned. In part 2, we talk to Judah Tanna, who rescues people being held captive in these compounds. Over the last 5 years, he's rescued thousands of them. He is extraordinary. So check it out. But why is that? Why is that happening? It's happening because the banks were forced to pay to compensate people who are scammed. What are Meta doing about it? What is LinkedIn doing about it? What are the social networks doing about it, where a lot of these interactions first begin?
Everybody up and down the scam chain, as people in this world like to call it, need to be doing more. Whether there needs to be more friction involved, because it's social media platforms, it's messaging platforms, it's banks, it's cryptocurrency exchanges. I mean, it's a little too easy to meet somebody online and send money to somebody online these days, and everybody needs to be putting up some guardrails. And there's a couple ways that platforms like Facebook are exploited, which is, first of all, messaging, but also advertising. There are cases of these scam operations advertising to potential customers through social media platforms for investment opportunities.
Now, I know you're not suggesting that Meta would be reluctant to take to challenge those because it's actually advertising revenue.
Yeah, I mean, you can see how there'd be an incentive there to not do anything about it.
It's funny because after I listened to part of the podcast, sort of I mimicked one of these scenarios and I asked ChatGPT what it thought. It's just like, first of all, everything that you're describing is a little suspicious. I don't want you to feel, and it really took them through all the little points that would be points of concern. And it made me wonder, why isn't that a little window on every single social media?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that can be done to go to the platforms where people are, whether it's on social media or the banks or whatever, where if you can kind of catch them in the middle and present them with that kind of second thought of, are you sure you want to be doing this? Have you checked? Kind of the way your bank does now with if you try to send money, I get it now more and more, right? Where my bank will try to be like,
yeah. And why is that? Why is that happening? It's happening because the banks were forced to pay to compensate people who are scammed. Well, we could use some of that same intelligent technology that's highly predictive to warn you off things. It's there.
Yeah, you're quite right. Yeah. Here in the UK, right? I think banks are required to compensate people up to £85,000 if they've been victim of a scam.
I don't know what the number is, but it's enough that it's gotten really hard. It's hard to make frivolous, even familiar, repetitive transactions, I find, get challenged now. I mean, I remember I was developing a movie on Nigerian email scams about, 12, 15 years ago. And And I interviewed a guy who lived in somewhere in Louisiana, and he got contacted by a business group, somebody who pretended to be a business group out of Nigeria. That's inherently suspicious. And he said, look, I knew that was weird. I checked them out, and they seemed to line up. I said, listen, if you want to talk to me, send me a business class ticket and put me up in a nice hotel. Boom. 2 days later, a business class ticket shows up, all checked out, all fully paid, nice reservations at a good restaurant and a good hotel in Lagos. I got picked up at the airport. And this is orders of magnitude less sophisticated. There's no AI involved in any of this. He was met by his greeter, not with a sign outside the airport. He was met inside immigration and security by them, and who walked him past immigration in Nigeria and into a car. He wanted to go to his hotel. They said, we want you to meet the boss first. And they took him to a building. And he said, I'm really tired. I've been on a plane for 12 hours. And they said, no, it's going to be short, but he really wants to shake your hand. And he was locked. He was in a room for 2 days getting the crap beaten out of him. And then they took him out to some place out in the countryside. They locked him up, shackled him in a shack. And there were adjacent rooms, and there were like 15 or 20 other people. Some been there for months. And he said, when they first said, they said, you want me to give you money? I'm here for money from you. But to them, you're a rich white guy, you're a rich white businessman. You're going to find the money. He told his wife, he said, listen, if I'm sounding weird on the phone, or if you're not hearing from me, call the FBI.
So interesting, though. I mean, so many parallels to what's going on now in that story. So as you were hearing this series or hearing about pig butchering scams, I mean, you must have been thinking about the kind of methods that were common to them, but also the ways that it's evolved over the intervening 10, 15 years.
The sheer magnitude of it, this idea that there are, 750,000, 1 million people in these operations that are literally abducting computer scientists and data people and keeping them locked up until they develop AI that's good enough to actually be able to do some of this, work, and then to beating the crap out of some of them, killing some of them. And those are people who went into these compounds thinking they were going for a great job opportunity, having just come out of a physics program or a computer science program at an accredited university.
There have been sponsors of Premier League teams that have been associated or have been kind of in networks with known scam operations. I think the line we use in the series is something like, trying to ask who scammed me is trying to ask, who made my Big Mac.
Some of these operations are sponsoring, or at least there's a connection to sponsorship to Champions League football teams, right?
There have been sponsors of Premier League teams, front of shirt sponsors, like the logo that goes on the front of the shirt of these football teams, that have been associated or have been kind of in networks with known scam operations. And a lot of these companies are Asian online sports betting firms that are targeting Asian customers. Like they're advertising on English Premier League football shirts, not because they're trying to target English football fans. They're trying to target Asian football fans who are watching the Premier League.
Explain what their purpose is, because they have a business purpose. This is not just vanity.
It's money laundering, basically. So you've stolen this money through scams, and you have to somehow obscure its trail so that somebody kind of doesn't come looking for that money. The kind of real world way to think about it is, let's say the three of us all go buy out a poker table, in some casino, some back room. We're all going to play poker together and gamble. And at the end of it, one of us is going to walk away with all the money. If we three are this little money laundering operation, we don't really care which of the three of us walks away with all the money. The point is, we walked in with our cash, we bought chips, we gambled those chips, played them, cashed out our chips, and walked out with other cash, money laundered, right? There's no way to connect this cash we walked out with to the stuff we walked in with. So something similar happens in a kind of digital space where, if you're placing bets with these online betting companies, as long as you're spreading your bets sufficiently, the site's going to take a little bit of a cut but that's kind of, it's your money laundering tax. You don't really mind. You then are able to walk out with laundered proceeds. So that's why I think suspicion falls on some of these betting companies, is that companies like them have been known to help facilitate laundering for some of these scam operations, and that's also why scam operations in the region often kind of sit side by side with casinos or betting operations. They kind of go hand in hand in a lot of cases.
Were you able to get a sense whether they go hand in hand or they originate from the same sources, whether they're part of a they're interlinked?
I think people are really tempted to think about this in terms of a kind of traditional mafia or something, where you've got this kind of don at the top who oversees the whole operation. And often in the cases here, it's that it doesn't work that way. It's an economy. It's a network.
I'm not thinking of it in the old mafia paradigm. I'm thinking of it in the Amazon paradigm. They're a supply chain, they're a online retailer, and what you're describing, to me, sounded like that.
I think the line we use in the series is something like, trying to ask who scammed me is trying to ask, who made my Big Mac.
There's something in your podcast which again was one of those sort of head-turning things, that these compounds, you can be an investor in them, you can actually set up shop in them yourself and almost be a franchisee, can't you?
In one compound, there's a bunch of offices, and there might be it's kind of like, like a retail park or something. There might be a kind of organization that administers the park and kind of sets the rules, but it's a bunch of companies operating side by side within it, a bunch of people who've invested and set up shop. Yeah, absolutely.
How many people are involved in pig butchering operations, not just with the victims of the compounds, but what's the sort of ballpark number that you know of?
Myanmar is just, we focus a lot on it in the series, but it's just one of several. I mean, Cambodia is a huge center for this stuff. The Philippines. And we had a shocking stat in the series where, ballpark numbers, the money being made by these scam operations is about half in Cambodia, is about half of the country's formal GDP. It's a huge employer, and you get why. It's like if you live and work in that part of the world, wages aren't that high. Your police and what they're offering you to look the other way is just huge relative to your paycheck. I mean, of course you're going to do that.
I feel like we're doing the marketing video for them. I wonder if there's going to be one person who sees this podcast who's like,
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Mildred, we've been thinking where to put the money. And, the market's pretty volatile these days. But then there's pig butchering scams.
The wild bit is, at one point, the guy goes, and do you want to talk to some of the people who worked here? Because we got them on the roof. And it's like, what do you mean? And police moved in, they detained people. They didn't have room in the jails. So they've detained people just in these kind of temporary homes, these kind of mobile home things up on the roof of the place. The Philippine stuff is crazy because, when you think of Myanmar, Myanmar's in a civil war and it has been for ages. And so it's you kind of wonder, why can't anybody just go in and rescue these people and shut these places down? And in the case of Myanmar, the answer is kind of obvious. I mean, it's just a dangerous, lawless place, or at least parts of it are dangerous, lawless places. Some of these border regions that are controlled by local militias. Philippines is a relatively free and democratic place, and there's a great bit of reporting Su Lin's in a town called Bamban, which looks like this little town. There's not much going on. There's kind of one main street with a couple of fast food restaurants on it. And then there's this massive, it looks like a shopping mall, like behind the city hall, at this kind of gleaming complex that looks totally out of place there. And then you ask people kind of what's in there, and they go, I don't know. Yeah, shopping mall, I don't know. Yeah, they sort of don't know or pretend not to know. What they are these scam compounds that, because local officials and local police have been paid off because there's so much money coming into these places, they're allowed to operate. The presidential Anti-Organized Crime Commission. Their offices are in a former scam compound. They just moved into some place they shut down, both because they needed some office space, and there was this big office in Manila, but also because they want to show it off kind of like a museum. And so they have all the banks of computers where people used to work, and they have the karaoke parlors, and they have the torture rooms. And then the wild bit is at one point the guy goes, and do you want to talk to some of the people who worked here? Because we got them on the roof. And it's like, what do you mean? And they've been, police moved in, they detained people. They didn't have room in the jails. So they've detained people just in these kind of temporary homes, these kind of mobile home things up on the roof of the place.
I'm going to ask us an obvious and both stupid and obvious question, but I mean, there's no shortage of real estate available. Why the roof of a building?
I guess just to make use of the space, and to have them there. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the jails were full, and maybe it's all part of the museum. You can actually go meet some people.
I mean, once you've done the National Gallery and the Museum of Anthropology, what's left? These are people who are being held because they were scammers, they're confessed scammers, and they're criminals, or because they're people that just they're from other countries and they have no passport and they haven't been repatriated. Or both?
Well, it's a great question because it's hard to tell often, right? You go into a place and you shut the place down and people say, oh, I'm a trafficking victim. I'm not here voluntarily. In a lot of cases, that's true. Not in every case. And so there are a lot of, whether it's police or NGOs, there are people who are trying to sift through and go, okay, who is sincerely a trafficking victim here and who is here voluntarily? And the people that are there voluntarily, one guy says in the series, he goes, oh, I was just visiting. I was just here like drinking with a friend of mine. And, I got drunk and passed out, and I wake up the next morning and police are raiding, and here I am, And it's like, okay, you just happened to be in that day.
There were a couple of things in the podcast that sort of sent chill down my back. And one of them was like the morning, like one of the mantras of one of the bosses was, as people went to work, was, let's get to it. This is economic World War III. Am I remembering right?
Yeah. There was a guy named Jalil who had been trafficked from Uganda, and he gets to this compound, is taken inside. I think it was early on he heard people chant, cripple the U.S. and European economies, and that this is, and a guy, this boss who'd brought him in and was coaching him through said, this is World War III. Yeah, it's quite chilling, isn't it?
Is there a crossover to some of the Russian republics, to the stands? Is there an overlap, or are they completely separate entities?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely common methods between some of these places. I mean, we didn't get into it in the series, but we did talk to people who, have investigated very similar looking operations in Eastern Europe. There are like office towers in Tbilisi in Georgia, where there was one story of an office that got shut down, which police went in and it seemed like a nice place to work. Like, I think it was November, and they still had like Halloween decorations up in the office. Like they had like office parties, and there were prizes, and it was like a great view over the city from up on whatever floor, and so it's crazy. So yeah, as far as kind of whether they're all controlled by common entities, I don't know, but we've heard stories about similar operations in the Middle East where people went in and they found training manuals that had Chinese characters in them. I think it's people are buying and passing along these methods, and we focus on Southeast Asia, but it's going on all over the world.
It's a brilliant business model. I mean, it's a very cynical business model. But if you're not sure where you want to invest your money or what you want to take up, and you have, little to no scruples, it's not the worst choice. It's just loathsome.
I think probably there's also some obscuring there's a bit of a, people will get into it with a kind of willful ignorance, right? They might be investing in some, online business that does investments, and they maybe they don't know, and they don't really want to know what it is they're investing in.
Well, wasn't the mayor in your podcast, wasn't the mayor like front and center in the whole in the whole process of the development of because it was developed. It wasn't pre-existing. They developed it, they built it out, they populated it, they equipped it.
Yeah, police went in and they they raided the place and they went through the documents and they found the mayor's name on like the utility bills, and they were like, "What is?" And yes, she had a financial interest in this compound. I believe she's now in jail. She tried to escape the Philippines, and they caught her in, I want to say, Indonesia. Brought her back, and they dragged her in front of the Senate. There have been Senate hearings in the Philippines when they've tried to get hold of this, and it's become such a phenomenon there. This senator was saying, yeah, people are calling it Senate flicks because people all over the country are tuning into these hearings. It's like the OJ trial or something. Like everyone's watching, these hearings where they're dragging this mayor of this town out to answer for what's happened. The biggest movie in China was a movie called No More Bets. It made something like $500 million. It was a story about a guy who got abducted and taken and made to scam people in a foreign compound. Before they came for the rest of the world, they were targeting people back home in China with these sorts of scams. And they spent years perfecting them, and that's why when these scams then came for everybody else, they felt sophisticated and fully formed. So the connections to China are a lot of these organizations, not all of them, but a lot of the organizations that run these compounds are of Chinese origin, or the people are originally from China and have left and are living in other parts of the region. I think probably once upon a time they were in China and going after people, scamming people, and then got chased out and had to set up camp, in places like Myanmar. I think we didn't find a lot of evidence that it's somehow orchestrated from the top by the party. I mean, the party has like 100 million members, and it's a huge country. It's a huge apparatus, and so it might be the case that there are officials here and there who are corrupted by this thing. But we didn't find any evidence, nor did we find it very credible that somehow this is orchestrated by the top leadership of the Communist Party. In fact, in China, the Communist Party has undertaken a massive campaign to crack down on this stuff and to educate the public about not falling for these scams. And there are like TV shows and blockbuster movies that depict this world. A couple of years ago, when that summer that like Barbie and Oppenheimer came out, it was the Barbenheimer summer. The biggest movie in China was a movie called No More Bets. It made something like $500 million in its like opening weekend or something. And it was a story about a guy who got abducted and taken and made to scam people in a foreign compound, And these productions have the backing of the Chinese Communist Party. You get a CEO with a drug habit, you're going to get some money out of them, but you're not going to ruin them. But if you get a CEO who thinks they've hit it big in crypto, you can take everything. And when somebody becomes victim to one of these scams, there's often a blast radius. The kind of Kansas bank CEO is the extreme example where the blast radius around him was the bank collapses and the investors lose a bunch of money. But most of the people we spoke to who were victims, they had borrowed money from friends and relatives, or they'd encouraged friends and relatives to go in with them. They said, "Hey, I'm in on this opportunity. Do you want to join me?" And so it's not just about the kind of direct victim of the scam. It's about the people all around them. And so there's whole families and communities that are really suffering from this. But it doesn't really get talked about because there's such a shame element to it. People feel embarrassed by it.
I mean, it's brilliantly elegant as a scam because the design of it is that it feels like other than the very top echelon and the people under them, so many of them are simply victimized, seriously victimized, and not in nuanced ways, but flat out. The idea that you would get the people doing your AI and your computer systems and your networks are actually people who you hijacked from their lives and are now forcibly is a bit mind-boggling.
Then there are people who did it voluntarily, but it's kind of like, if you live in war-torn Myanmar and there's not much economy to speak of where you live, and, going and working in this compound and chatting to people online is a way to make some money for you and your family. I mean, there are so many people in this chain who it's hard to feel too angry at. You can kind of understand, except for people kind of at the top, the people who really are running this kind of thing. there's so many people up and down this who you can kind of understand, why it is that they contribute their little part of this thing. And that's all it is. It's a lot of little pieces that make up this thing.
We're talking about just closing down TikTok in the US. If you have a Netflix US account, you can't watch Netflix UK, and vice versa. If you're a Brit, you don't get BBC iPlayer if you go back home. Why don't they just say, listen, until Binance, until whoever, until Tether are willing to actually get a grip on this activity, American citizens, British citizens simply do not have access to those networks. They're simply blocked.
Yeah, the disheartening part of that is you kind of shut down one method and they move on and they find something else. There was a good line in the series from a guy who was a kind of infiltrator in these compounds who said something like, what these criminal groups find is that, if you get a CEO with a drug habit, you're going to get some money out of them, but if you're not going to ruin them. But if you get a CEO who thinks they've hit it big in crypto, you can take everything. So yeah, it's crazy.
We're going to leave everybody on that charming. I think there's a greeting card there. All right, Sam, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. As for our viewers, we are not done, so stay tuned. In part 2, we talked to Judah Tana, who rescues people being held captive in these compounds. Over the last 5 years, he's rescued thousands of them. He is extraordinary, so check it out. And finally, thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. That way you'll be the first to see future episodes. And finally, if you know about an amazing story, please drop us a line. There's a contact down there somewhere below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time. As for our viewers, thank you for joining us as well. If you like what you've seen, please press like, subscribe to the channel, because I promise you, we're just getting started. So subscribe now so you don't miss the future episodes. And finally, if you've got a story of your own, if you think you've got something that belongs, we'd love to hear from you. There's an email down there below, a contact email. Please drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time.